Dear friends, I am glad to welcome everyone, our dear viewers, with you, Purity of Understanding. Let me remind you that this is a platform where we deeply and in detail discuss the most relevant, the most pressing topics with the most interesting experts of our country and in general the whole world. Let me remind you, of course, that this is a platform for smart and educated people. Who hasn't gone then? And we, by the way, have this article, we have our own story about this. Dear friends, well, looking ahead, let me break the protocol a little and immediately introduce our guest. This is Maria Zakharova, Director of the Information and Press Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia.
Thank goodness for your smile. I just keep gazing at your expressions, as Gorchakov once noted, deeply engrossed.
And we are trying to understand which of us is formed.
And considering them perceptive would equate to equating them with somberness.
Understood, an insightful, knowledgeable, and melancholic individual.
All right. Our regular host, Alexei Shadaev.
Good luck to everyone.
Semyon Uralov, a political scientist, journalist, and author, steadfast in his position. Today we have a lot of questions for you, Maria Vladimirovna, because, well, first of all, once again, yes, thank you for coming to us. In recent years, the world is living, well, in some kind of colossal turbulence. The world is running a fever. International institutions have already ordered us to live globally for a long time. I mean, they are not fulfilling their function. Often it is not clear at all how the international agenda is formed.
We came in from the Trump cards.
Yes, I'm with the Trumps, as Alicia likes to say. It's unclear how the international agenda is formed because, well, sometimes, for example, everything depends on what Donald Trump wrote on social networks. And in general, modern first persons are often simple. Trolling each other on the internet, there, I took a picture with it, I didn't take a picture with it.
The international discussion has turned into, so to speak, excuse the expression, a fight in the comments, yes, and it is conducted in approximately this language, in this style. And
it's not clear how to react, how to answer your question. Let's agree that we will not slip into this style with you. All these words are
kindly reserve that for others. I enjoy trolling and joking, but without disrespect. Let's ensure we don't overstep boundaries. You know, they said in recent years, I just wrote down the world lives and then they listed all these depressing moments. But the last centuries, of course, it wasn't like that, right? It was wonderful. There were no wars, there were no problems, there were no
monstrous acts of dehumanization. What else is there to discuss at length?
No, at least there were a few more or less understandable rules back then.
Rules of decency.
Even in tragic moments like gas chambers, there existed certain decencies. You know, that expression I heard, I don't know how old I was there, 5, 7, well, that's about, yeah, that life is a struggle. I don't remember where or how I encountered this idea, whether through school lessons on the Great October Socialist Revolution or perhaps even in a joke someone told. The context escapes me, but the idea lingered, leaving me confused. Why? But now, using different examples and everything that is read in fiction, and when studying history, it must be studied and studied constantly, because every day something new is discovered and every day something already becomes history. Of course, turning to the general problems of the universe from the point of view of value issues and so on, life is exactly the struggle, including for remaining human beings and for what seemed to us in my childhood and in my adolescence to be a worn-out record.
For peace.
Peace is not a natural state. It resists the inherent dynamics of existence.
In realms such as politics, economics, and the broader scope of history, peace seems elusive. This isn't my personal ideology or conclusion, but an observation of reality.
The entire historical process confirms this convincingly.
Renowned figures have commented on it extensively. The world
requires a fight for it. Therefore, it is not in recent years that the world has experienced all the horrors through a comma. This is the last, well, as far as we know, tens of thousands of years. Probably, yes, we calculated it.
Well, plus or minus, well, tens, let's say, modestly, let's say tens of thousands of years, we can more or less somehow review. We don't go into the millions because with there, well, at least for me, there is little, yes, little that is known there.
All these years, decades, centuries, millennia, which have come down to us in the form of epics, artifacts, chronicles, sacred books, objects of art, and so on, testify to exactly this. You want peace. You have to fight for it. You have to create conditions for peace within your community, whether it is a state, a country, some kind of community, integration, and so on, in the form of some kind of buffer rings at different points of the world to rely on them, and so on and so on. So let's answer your question without spreading our thoughts down the tree. Two theses. The first is not recent years, it has always been like this. And the second is for all the good. I mean, not in the context of personal consumption, but precisely what you and I civilizationally define as goals, tasks, certain constants, or
some tuning forks for all this, of course, you have to fight.
It's just that starting from this, I would like to strengthen the thesis that yes, the struggle has been and is always going on, but what are we recording? We note significant changes in the style of this struggle precisely at that very last time. And this is the style, yes, this is the style of statements, the style of rhetoric, the style of public gesture in international politics.
Can I give you an example?
There are many different versions. There are more, so to speak, confirmed by facts. There are less. There are more romantic ones. Never mind. Let's now say that this phrase belongs to one of the leaders protected by the West who grew up in Western, so to speak, huts. This phrase is dedicated to him and was said also the chairman of the Western world, not at all, as you said, in recent years. And this was the 20th century. Remember, he is, of course, a son of a bitch, but he is, as the relevant Western leader said, our son of a bitch.
How is that? Which piggy bank will you take this to? More or less digestible from the point of view of rules of behavior and decency. In my opinion, we were still talking about the 20th century where there was.
And the concept, one way or another, glorified by Westernism of gentlemanship, that is a certain code of at least external honor, external decency, external behavior. There was an understanding that not all people who would like to do so without having the opportunity and education level of authority reach this most cherished microphone, podium, and so on, they could do it. That is still, this required qualifications, this required, well, I don't know, experience, work on oneself. And at the same time, that is, here there is no segregation of people, there is no derogatory attitude, God forbid, but it is meant that when people broadcast to the audience, this implied one way or another passing some path. Yes. In the end, it could turn out to be Hitler's. In the end, it could turn out to be really outstanding people from a good, from a beautiful point of view, outstanding public figures and so on. But one way or another, it was some kind of way, and not like now any person who buys means of communication can instantly turn out to be this alleged prophet, a false prophet to an audience of millions. It was said then anyway. Hearing such expressions. So absolutely, so no. And for example, well, these are chronicles. Okay, we do not have audio recordings or documentary footage from antiquity, the ancient world and ancient Rome. But what came as statements of their Caesars, their representatives, nobles, elites, who were in charge of the public state, then, there are also such expressions and actions, I would say, arrogant, speaking today's language. No, I think that there is nothing new under the moon.
Caesar defeated Gaul, not Caesar's comets, right? This one right there.
There was a lot there. There was a lot there. Let's not go into depth now. And you don't have the 18 plus mark, right? There is a lot that can be cited there that was monstrous. And look how interesting it turns out. Today, and you have noticed this, we are reaching the point of splitting a hair. But how ethical is it, and how much does it, so to speak, cross some boundaries of what is allowed in terms of rhetoric?
Let's rewind for a second several centuries, thousands of years ago.
People simply by raising a finger up or down decided a person's fate, not because their lives depended on it, but simply because it was part of the entertainment. Understand?
Just like, I don't know, gas chambers there or burying people in pits, everything was somehow.
Now, the Volyn massacre is being discussed in this context. It is ethical, unethical to sing heroes.
Fine, right? That is when about 80 years ago, there were pluses and minuses, yes, when people, I say again, just not for the faint-hearted, were put in a row in order to save bullets and put them with one bullet. And not only that, these calculations were transmitted from,
So to speak, shooter to shooter, we are talking about the Nazis, about collaborators, about Bandera. They had calculations so as not to waste a lot of ammunition on the peaceful civilian population. They could be lined up in a row, and therefore what they did with people there, how they were raised to villas, how their skin was peeled off, just like that. Not because it was something, not because it was a threat to life, because it was also a kind of entertainment in the first half of the 20th century.
and we are now discussing with you, yes, there's trolling, stylistics, right? No, this is not about recent years. This is about the fact that this is a historical pendulum and humanity has repeatedly approached a certain edge and looked into this abyss. And every time it was possible, well, by the way, not every time, if we proceed from biblical historiography, then there were moments
when yes, it was different. And when the Almighty said, no, well, that's it. Now that's enough. Now there will be a little water. And then we begin to quickly build the ark all over again. Yes, there was such a thing. But if we talk about historiography from the point of view of conflicts, wars, madness, which humanity was capable of, still approaching this edge and sometimes even going beyond the edge, still somehow managed, yes, the last.
How much will we take? Millennium, yes, somehow get away from it. They pay different prices for it.
Well, not least, by the way, thanks to diplomats, because just the history of the last few centuries, yes, starting probably from the end of the 30-year war, is when, after all, a bloody massacre, people find the strength to sit down and negotiate. And there is some special work of these people who conduct these congresses, these treaties after wars. The rules of the Westphalian system, the Versailles system, the Yalta-Potsdam system are earned.
I have a question, help me answer.
Previously, well, at least again, both in fiction and in specialized literature, the work of a lawyer included understanding that a person committed some offense, let's say, maybe not a crime, an offense, let's say, and
but at the same time, the lawyer defended his client, either the one who was identified to him as part of the process or the one who hired him and so on. As I understand it, the audience, as you said, is smart, will correct me or maybe confirm my words. Well, at least I read that in a number of countries are now introducing norms, well, I don't know, call it ethical standards of work or legally enshrined there, then a lawyer cannot defend his word if he becomes reliably aware of the commission of a crime. Well, I read about this in a retelling, maybe this is not so. Here I have a question for you. What do you think society, the 21st century, I say, the whole society, the world, today's society, we have come to such a level of development when knowing That a client, a person, an organization committed a crime, it still needs to be defended by proving the opposite.
I have an answer.
We have all read Alex Karp's manifesto, and it is stated in plain text that not all civilizations, races, and cultures are equally useful. Some do not deserve to exist at all. This is right here in the same piggy bank. That is, if this is seriously discussed about that, not that there is an individual person in court, yes, and not that even a single state, but an entire civilization can be erased with an eraser with the help of modern ones.
Means yes, then of course this principle, yes, the principle of the bar, the principle of the right to defense. Moreover, this right, of course, absolutely for everyone, even for people who really committed terrible crimes. This was one of the basic postulates of that also Roman law. Here,
This is not the answer to the question. I'm asking about something else. I'm talking about something else. I am talking about the fact that we now do not and cannot subject any doubt, even hypothetical. Firstly, it is not my competence. Secondly, I, to be honest, believe that this is definitely in some specialized communities, such a discussion should take place regarding the presumption of innocence. This is not discussed. We are talking about something else. We are talking about the fact that a person who assumes the function of a defender and it is imputed to him according to the law, according to the traditions existing in this or that society, he knows it thoroughly. His client is absolutely clearly recognized, says that a crime has really been committed. In a number of countries, some new norms are being adopted or developed or are already stipulated, suggesting that in this case, protection is impossible. Anything at all.
so look, right to
Protection is protection in the form of for example, a person says he stole. And the lawyer says, well, he didn't steal, he did something else there, although he knows full well that his ward committed this crime. Do you think society requires a transition to this new quality? Is it not timely or is it self-evident? Because when I first encountered this, it was a few months ago. I became extremely interested. I wanted to discuss this with someone. That's why the application was made for your intellectual, so to speak, program. I became interested because this is directly related to the question that I was asked.
First of all, the right to defense is quite different principle than the presumption of innocence. That is, the right to defense also includes the guilty. And by the way, one of the famous speeches, for example, Plevaka, simply in court, he undertook to defend the old woman who stole the kettle. And it is reliably known that what happened, that she stole it. And the pathos of the speech was that Russia withstood it there, Chernigov, Polovtsev, Tatars, Mongols there, Polakov, Napoleon, and so on. But if we do not now convict the old woman for hiding the kettle, then it means that she will collapse. It turns out that the old woman, by the way, was acquitted. He did not deny that she did it. He did not deny. That is the right to defense. The lawyer has a lot of options, for example, to mitigate the punishment, even when it is determined that there is guilt.
Mitigating circumstances, a lot of things. I understand. This is a function. From this, not only do they abandon it, from this, you need to move somewhat to another aspect. There is reliable information that this was done. It was done incorrectly, contrary to the law, and this is refuted during the defense and stated otherwise that nothing wrong was done. Is that how you feel about it? That is, the defenders understand that a crime has been committed, but in rhetoric and positioning, they completely reject it and pretend that this did not happen.
I understand. This also applies to the Volyn massacre. This also applies to the recent, for example, trial for undermining Nord Streams. That is, the crime was proven, the persons are known, but since they committed all this in the name of good, then it means you can build a rhetorical construction in which, well, in essence, in general, yes, they committed it, but by and large, the end justifies the means. Yes, this answer of mine is exactly like that, since we immediately outlined with you, yes, what is the difference between our positions. Ivan, in fact, began.
we say that something has changed recently. You claim that nothing has changed since ancient Babylon, Egypt, and there
I didn't say that.
I said that all these processes took place one way or another and were more complicated than the situation. I didn't say that everything was the same. In no way.
Perhaps I oversimplified it. My argument is that it's different now.
Still, I continue to insist that this change, not only in stylistics, has already been mentioned many times, but also in the basic approach. And the main thing is what has changed and why what you are talking about has become possible.
This is that the basic logic of right, that is, there are certain laws, certain norms that we all live by, has been replaced by the logic of absolute struggle for absolute good. Well, remember, in the movie Lord of the Rings, the ambassador of Mordor goes out and tries to negotiate with the White Army, and then Aragorn takes out his sword, cuts off his head right there, and says, "I don't trust the forces of evil."
Ivan, can you provide an answer to this?
Why?
Wait, you didn't like my answer? Here, I insist it has changed. Not a right anymore, but merely a topic of discussion.
What I'm talking about is that this approach, when, well, relatively speaking, a defender, whether a lawyer, whether a person who will represent interests, understanding that a crime was committed during the defense process, completely rejects the fact, essentially presenting the case in a false light, saying that none of this happened, and all the evidence presented accordingly has no force.
Do you understand? That is, it didn't seem to be considered before.
It wasn't possible before, yes.
Previously, this wasn't seen as a violation and wasn't considered feasible earlier. Now, let's move on to diplomacy. I understand that we have an answer now. We were not looking for it.
No, it's just that the whole jurisprudence is the point.
Let's move on to diplomacy, Ivan.
Demonic and devilish.
Oh, I insist, please summon the priest without hesitation.
This is normal in this contour. Look, you said such an interesting phrase that including many things were avoided, or a large role of diplomats and so on. Negotiations of diplomats, negotiators, diplomats participating in negotiations and so on.
Given the depth of discussion you presented, I feel compelled to underline the diverse interpretations surrounding the duties and responsibilities associated with the diplomat's role. There are tasks of diplomacy. It encompasses discovering common ground while adhering strictly to the principles of legality, considering international bilateral treaties, agreements, traditions, and safeguarding national interests comprehensively.
The most difficult job. But what we are seeing now, and here I honestly think that of course there are historical examples, but in this I see a certain scary novella.
We see a completely changed, transformed, in the most terrible sense of the word, the concept of diplomacy for the collective West. These are the devil's advocates. These are the people. Now, I'm not talking about everyone. I'm talking about the fact that many people have a false impression about the profession there, who believe that they are obliged to use the entire dream of international law in order to justify themselves. This is a stage that has already been passed. This was already somewhere 30, 40, 50 years ago, they confessed. And that they should change the system, as it were, legally, I mean international law, to serve their interests, not when, well, relatively speaking, a shame has occurred, yes, and we need to somehow find a minimum way justifying oneself. Well, I mean, minimally, let's say these costs are terrible, but somehow mitigate them, minimize them.
No?
And then, when every act has already been paid, just as an indulgence was paid in their culture, the entire system must already work so that it gets up in the morning. Yes, the sun is there in the west. I didn't make reservations, yes, and everything it does is already good, and the entire system must immediately, like sunflowers, turn, yes, behind this society. This is scary, and this I consider just a novella.
And when we talk about, well, diplomacy should help and of course help and so on, what kind of diplomacy is that? This is the kind of diplomacy for which there are laws, order, conscience, morality.
Recognizing national interests while respecting those who differ in perspectives, especially concerning critical matters.
If I adhere to distinct ethical principles, how can I effectively communicate with such individuals?
Devil's diplomats, there's the movie The Devil's Advocate, which shows this underside of it.
Avoid sinking into artistic representation.
Instead, aim to engage using contemporary and relevant terminology. And this is the kind of diplomacy of devils. When they know who attacked during World War II, they know who killed, they know who bequeathed. After a few decades, they dig them up and, so to speak, reincarnate and pretend that it is not that they do not know, but that those who repelled the attack, who were the victims and who became the victor over this evil, did it.
This is no longer diplomacy. It's already some kind of, I don't even know what it's, well, I don't know. It's really some kind of, I return it to you.
I'm just describing it a little metaphorically.
Still, it turns out we still agreed that something has changed and something really looks new, which still didn't happen before.
You know, by the new, I always emphasize this, what looks like, what.
Passing each test, humanity draws certain conclusions and lays this as its civilizational experience, moving to a certain new level. Not that it is genetically inherent in any case. What is meant in the tablets is passing on this experience to the future generation, growing. Well, for example, the First World War passed, which became an incredible shock for Europe, for Western Europe, for all of Europe.
Because on the one hand, Europe went through wars and the Napoleonic Wars. But if you read this in documents, and if you read this especially from Tolstoy, there was a definite, one way or another, some element still preserved humanism and not dehumanization. Yes, and the battles were terrible, and the victims were monstrous, and the destruction, and so on. But there was still understanding, yes.
The behavior of this very and mercy on the battlefield, which remained, and punishment for a crime despite nothing there, and so on. The First World War was a shock. How this most civilized part, so-called, of the world community got to such a degree of hatred for each other that it killed massively, killed so terribly, and also using chemical weapons for the first time. And you will remember how world literature, European Western literature, responded to this. This is the literature of the so-called lost generation.
It's remark.
Naturally, without question, these works served as a profound catalyst, spurring an extensive reevaluation of fundamental ideologies and perspectives. The prohibitions outlined regarding certain acts of hostilities marked an approach towards the embryonic understanding of humanitarian law. Though legal specialists may grant us leniency, these developments initiated basic principles that eventually steered humanity toward crafting an international comprehensive framework for conflict resolution on a global stage.
Wilsonian, yes, League of Nations.
Yes, of course, of course. The unsettling reality lies in humanity's perpetual tendency to revisit past errors. Despite making resolutions, vowing never to regress, and establishing safeguards, history demonstrates a cycle where, ironically, even greater missteps unfold, at times surpassing the initial triggers of epiphany.
Pendulum or sinusoid, it still exists historically. But at the same time, you look the Second World War, again, this precipice is an abyss. You see, from what I gather, and considering a generational closeness, we share an understanding, a mutual frame of reference shaped by similar experiences.
We saw this from childhood in newsreel footage, not only from May 9th to May 9th. It was our culture. I mean, this is what surrounded us, and monuments and veterans and stories and fiction and films, of course. We were shown this truthfully, but at the same time delicately, so as not to turn ourselves into animals. That is, we were made to understand. We were told what they were.
Acts of dehumanization, but at the same time, they did not provoke us, yes, and did not incite a feeling of hatred in us, and so on. Unique, by the way, was the work in this sense of the ideologists of that period, how to instill this knowledge, how to instill rejection of any Nazism, nationalism, but at the same time, do not develop hatred.
And at the same time, stimulate a unique feeling. Forgiveness, yes, and not arrogant forgiveness. Yes, here I give you my forgiveness.
Oh, our Russian Christianity.
Understanding, yes, despite the fact that the word Christianity was generally taboo. Well, not that it was taboo, but understandably it wasn't in everyday life.
But nevertheless, the phrase Hitler's come and go and the great German people remain said as early as 44.
Simultaneously, our work held uniqueness amidst other societal elements and efforts. I'm immensely grateful that I became a recipient of this educational process of that period. This is with me forever. But at the same time, it played with us, well, you don't want to tell a bad joke, but it let us down a little bit.
I truly believed everyone shared that perspective.
Oh, well, that job wasn't there.
I was absolutely unsure about it.
Well, there can't be such a situation that about 27 million victims, no matter how many further discoveries there are, no matter how many clarifications of data and so on, the whole world knows about this catastrophic figure and will never forget it. I could never imagine that Hiroshima and Nagasaki will be restitched in such a way that those who bombed will be forgotten and they will be on the front stage, as it were. New heroes have been brought out who supposedly did this. And when I didn't think that Babi Yar would be, as it were, half known as a component of only one part of the tragedy, and everything else would somehow be very carefully and sometimes then carelessly thrown into the bucket. It seems to me that I still have the right in this case to say about our generation that everyone knows this.
And that's for ages.
We analyzed this in one of our podcasts. But let's do it this way. Kaya Kalos, she is also from our generation, from the same Soviet Union as us. She watched the same films as a child with her, therefore, parents, Soviet functionaries, so prominent. And notice, right?
No, it's not like that at all. Firstly, we watched films, whether on TV, in the cinema, or read books, or brought something from the street. We had parents who told us, or parents or grandparents who said, this is not good. Or, I have to explain something else to you. We were told that this is ours, this is not ours, this is bad, this is good.
And someone was told, remember this very sacramental phrase, which appeared as a meme in the 14th year, not everything is so clear. And to someone they said that, and to someone they said, that, don't look at it.
Others were advised to wait with the promise that their circumstances would improve eventually. And so, no, everything was there, everything wasn't like that.
There were many Forest brothers in Lithuania and different families there differently.
I was struck by her story, Kai Kallas, about how she is in Estonia. In my opinion, it was Kai Kallas and about Estonia, as it turned out that she...
No, sorry, it wasn't her.
It was one of our compatriots who not so long ago gave an interview, so to speak, to one foreign publication. And in this case, no sarcasm, simply has to say this in order to comply with our corresponding law. She's also from one of the Baltic countries, and she said that when she went to school there on the territory of the Baltic Republic, then part of the Soviet Union, naturally she learned her national language, one of the 3 Baltic languages, during school. Then she began to learn English at school, well, probably with teachers in the first grades, and she began to learn Russian only from the 2nd or 3rd grade. And now these are the people who prohibit those who are called national minorities, for whom Russian is their native language, from teaching it in schools. Can you imagine? And they pour mud on the Soviet education system and the Soviet Union, which supposedly did not give them the opportunity to realize their national identity. That is, this is confirmation when in school they taught their national language in the Baltic states right away. But this was a school precisely on, so to speak, oriented on the national language. Then it was possible to teach English and Russian from some later grades there, from the 3rd and 4th grades. So everything was, it was different. I still would like to return to the topic regarding the fact that diplomacy helps, and a diplomat a priori has such a constructive, positive role in preventing conflicts and so on. I apologize, but Colin Powell, who sat with a test tube in the UN Security Council hall, he was a diplomat, he was not. The Cossacks sent, he was not a politician who was instantly converted, as happened to them. And it happens he was the US Secretary of State. He was a man associated with, it doesn't matter, so to speak, with what nuances, but he was engaged in American diplomacy professionally, he knew it and so on. He waved the test tube, symbolizing a greater narrative. Let's now revisit the thesis in question. About the legal profession, which is sometimes engaged in by a Western diplomat, obviously knowing that this is not true, that this is a lie. Then he gave, probably 15 years later, literally it seems to me a year or 2 before his death, he said that he had been set up. I never understood from his statements, he knew, he didn't know, but I think that an adult person, an adult man, let's add, who has reached such heights, he probably guesses that it is unlikely that he would have been given a test tube with disputes there, I don't know, anthrax or giggle, to bring it to the UN podium. Yes, or even some flammable substance simply because it is prohibited. Laws of both New York and norms, so to speak, regulating security inside the UN headquarters. He, of course, understood that it was all on camera, that it was all a game. And this was a game that PR agencies told them, which in many ways became accomplices of this devil's advocate. Then Poroshenko walked with a piece of the bus, with bricks, with passports. Then we saw a lot of other figures and the white helmets and unhappy children who were allegedly represented as victims, so to speak, of all chemical experiments and so on. And then it turned out that these were all staged. Of course, Bucha is certainly at this stage, which is just a copy of Snemmersdorf.
Don't believe it, I recently talked to the German ambassador here. He was summoned to the foreign ministry. As for the person who left the Russian Federation, I can't be certain when this will be aired, so I don't know whether they are departing or already gone.
So, when I told him that the situation and this production in Bucha was absolutely played out according to the notes of the story in Nemmersdorf, he said, "Excuse me, where?"
I responded, saying it was part of German history for reference.
Surprisingly, the German ambassador seemed completely unaware. In the Russian Federation, which a priori, if he were an ambassador to another country, I mean not the European continent, maybe somewhere in a distant, I don't know, in a distant Latin American state perhaps, although in Latin America the German ambassador should also know a lot about the Second World War. But let's take, well, maybe somewhere there, somewhere, yes, maybe I would still understand, but understand that a person who comes to work in Russia does not know the name of Nemmersdorf. This is the same German city that in 1944, when Soviet troops retreated, became part of Goebbels' provocation when the bodies of supposedly killed civilians were laid out.
These are the notorious millions of raped German women. Then he is still this.
So you understand what's going on. He listened with his eyes wide open and roaring, and I tell him that you understand, because at that time an international tribunal was even created. He says, how? I say the international tribunal was created. Who headed it? A representative of the Baltic territories, so to speak, at that time. Yes, and this tribunal was masquerading as a kind of justice. I say, you know what happened afterwards when in all the German, the Third Reich newspapers, so to speak, in the world press, where else could Goebbels' propaganda then reach? Says what? I say that at the end of the 20th century, the German Foreign Ministry returned to this topic, opened the archives, and made a confession.
Later in the 20th century, the German Foreign Ministry reopened this topic, accessed the archives, and made an admission. They revealed it was a fabrication, a case of staged propaganda by Goebbels' machinery. Everything that
For this, Germany had to tolerate the rules.
I was taken aback. It truly came as a shock. Can you imagine? This is despite the fact that.
Hard for me to imagine, of course.
And he tells me, well, this all needs to be checked. I say, then you won't check me. Then you will check your colleagues from the German Foreign Ministry who.
So, excuse me, this is the question that not everyone, so to speak, who today calls himself a diplomat, and I'm primarily talking about the Western minority, as you say, promotes or contributes to a settlement. Really can and should, so to speak, working on this field in the negotiation process, so to speak, bring such a constructive treasure. Have we seen this? Okay, but the diplomacy of France and Germany on the failure to implement the Minsk agreements was all done by diplomats. There were no people who called themselves, I don't know, philosophers or theologians or engineers, teachers, doctors, and heads of state, talents. Merkel, they perform diplomatic functions when they carry out interstate activities. To deception when they said that Russia allegedly did not fulfill its part of the Minsk agreements, is obliged to fulfill it, and they fulfilled everything.
Well, that's it, upside down. Then why are we even talking to them? And at what point are we? Maybe already, if we have such a different picture of reality with the West, and they don't want to change it, or they know it but don't want to admit it.
This can be a magical reboot button. Yes, let's change the scenery. If there is something like that, then suggest it. I just don't know. We can reboot this world so that it becomes
divinely beautiful, as strictly speaking was originally intended, then reformulate. Probably not. Probably we should proceed from the reality that exists. Probably we should look for points of contact where possible. Probably we should fight back where this is the only way possible. Probably we should protect ourselves, should probably respond to the requests of others, protect them. Know your national interests, proceed from them. But the most important thing, we return to the beginning of your question, in my opinion, the most important thing is to be in reality and understand that there is reality. Do not proceed from the fact that some heavenly times will come, or that they, on the contrary, have passed irrevocably, and that but proceed from the fact that we know what happened, we know history, we know how do we want to see the future? We know what national strategies for our own development are based on. We understand who is a friend, who is an enemy, and who, as Vysotsky said, is like that. In fact, we build our own.
If we follow this logic, it turns out that the basic point of misunderstanding we have with them is precisely that we insist that reality is important.
But they are on the fact that reality in general is not important. The picture is more important.
No, this is a misunderstanding.
No, this is not an alternative history institution.
There is no misunderstanding on their part. This is our deepest misconception, who still has it, that supposedly they don't understand us. Stop thinking that way. Stop justifying them. The main thing, in my opinion, is that from the reality that I am calling for its feeling, this is precisely realistic. Finally, is the recognition that they understand well what they want to achieve, that they understand us very well, and that they pretend that they don't understand, and that they pretend that they share our misunderstanding of how they act. I want to say they are very rigid in their positions, and most importantly, they do not want to leave them. They are very satisfied with their formed platform, but what does it consist of? In the fact that there is, call it a class approach or something else, the fact that there are those whom they have so banally simply designated, but a beautiful garden or a golden billion, or with exceptional ones. And there are all the others, which are divided into the following segments. Service personnel, simply, so to speak, spending, this is their own terminology, and so on and so on. How to adapt them as they consider us, because we fall into the same category. Well, we need to see, look at how much has been done over these decades of what could signal that we absolutely share with them the values they declared, and human rights, and freedom, democracy, well-being. By the way, no one said that we should live only in asceticism. We will live in asceticism, and you too live in asceticism. No, well-being, prosperity, development, and so on. How much has been done? No world revolution was on the agenda. No separation of systems. They say your system is bad, our system is good. It seems like a market economy, free competition, international law, private property, which turned out to be unsacred to them.
So what?
And despite the fact that these dividing, terrible ravines seem to have disappeared, everything was, so to speak, leveled, bridges were built.
There is a certain cynicism in this, of course.
It turned out that again we came, all together to the same thing. They are somewhere there, on some mountain there, on some hill, in some blooming.
A shining city on a hill, aka a flowering garden.
Everyone else should pay attention to them, serve them, helpfully await their will.
Now here is the most important thing, and the most important argument of Western diplomacy. You won't believe which one. There are options. Why does it need to be this way?
Curiosity persists.
I'm deeply intrigued and curious to know more.
I couldn't understand it either. When you provide an example for clarity, he interrupts, dismissing it.
Well, you know how, yes, there we play some games and we have a bunch of bats there. Yes, that's when the bat is played. Here's a card like this for you. We have such a bat. Yes, we hit this card. This is a bat. And when we are already so clean, it's like the last card. When you say, well, look, it's like that for you and it's like that for us. They say, no. Despite seeming equal, this equality is entirely irrelevant. And when you say why?
Their response often hinges on the belief in their historical correctness.
That's it.
There is no basis for this. There is no even that monstrous simple explanation that existed in the 30s of the 20th century in the Third Reich, they say. The theory of racial superiority, there is no such thing now. Now, their concept of historical correctness borders on an absolutist belief system, which gives them the right to be exclusive, not to obey international law, to attack, to be aggressors, to bomb, destroy, kill, and does not give us the right to follow even the norms of international law and to protect and to just preserving your dignity, you know.
This is just, it's not difficult. They naturally have a historical right to this. And in fact, they invented the right itself. We are thieves for them. But they
Another question is, who is Rin here? This is very interesting. Wait, this is very interesting. Did they wipe it out? The right that... So it was for them Romans, ancient Rome, Roman ancient civilization, because not only, of course, Rome, but everything that existed, and before Rome, how much everything was accumulated. They destroyed it. They destroyed it before our eyes.
they invented it, they destroyed it. This is the right, as they say, for whom the right is needed, we will have to change it.
That's the point. They understand everything perfectly. They mimic the situation. They use every opportunity to make us believe that they don't understand something. They understand everything perfectly. They don't want to lose this self-appointed right to be better just because they think so. And when you say, wait, let's compete, you're for free competition, yes, let's see. They say, yes, it could be that you're the first here, and it could very well be that you're the first here. But that's just the exception that proves the rule. Or, for example, we gave you this opportunity to express yourself, okay? You say, wait a minute, but here, for example, space. Well, for example, because they are not in space to the extent that a modern world superpower should be.
As Zelensky said, discussing May 9th, correct?
I told Zelensky I'm allowing them to hold a parade. Is that okay? As if there is nothing to comment on here, but this is the same logic. Why are we talking about neo-Nazism? And because they wear swastika tattoos, and because they have these wolf-headed dogs on chevrons from the times of collaboration, and because Bandera and Shukevich, and because they destroy memory of true heroes. Of course, all this in combination, but also because this bacillus of self-appointed superiority without grounds dominates and has become a state ideology. That's why neo-Nazism. That's why this diplomacy is Western. It's no longer about diplomacy. It's exactly, by the way, the same thing about democracy. What kind of democracy is there? What are you talking about? Not because I believe that everything is bad or there is nothing good there, nothing like that, but because they took a term that has a global, so to speak, promotion, historical background and rehashed it.
They told people they had the same rights too, and of course.
The same thing happens, unfortunately, with diplomacy. These are not even national interests. They serve the momentary, conjunctural, sometimes terrible interests of a tiny group, not even communities, but individuals, refining all international legal norms under this specific task. What's left of global dialogue isn't even a dialogue any longer. It's been reduced to polemics, like a prayer service on counterterrorism. The 2000s embodied an overarching idea. Have you heard anything in the last, I don't know, couple of years on international platforms from their Western and not only Western leaders? Have you heard anything about countering terrorism?
So the story about Trump allegedly being targeted in Ankara by Iranian terrorists surfaced, didn't it?
Was not even supported by anyone. That is, it remained locally at the level, so to speak, of his rhetoric.
After all, no one abolished the UN structures that were created specifically to counter terrorism. No one abolished and did not sew up the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Western countries, where a significant segment is associated precisely with countering terrorism.
Well, international cooperation in the struggle.
No one canceled it? Have you heard anything?
Maybe some marches were held somewhere in Europe. There is no terrorism, or of course. That's it. Do you see what it says? This suggests that this has nothing to do with diplomacy. These are people who are specially trained so that under the guise of diplomacy, they do not even carry out any other activity now, their reconnaissance, gathering information, and so on.
And who
sharpened, excuse me for this jargon, sharpened to use the system to justify the crimes that are being committed against you. Not because, well, as we said, we need to, quickly sprinkle something there. So not somehow powder something of your own, somehow say it. No, because they think this system has to completely mutate under them, but at the same time remain kind of the same. That is, they are not abolishing the United Nations now, since they abolished and dismantled the League of Nations. They tried to do this in the early 2000s. They didn't succeed, and suddenly they realized that perhaps they will even need it more to legitimize crimes. That's all.
This is already happening now. I only have one moment. We must play according to their rules on their field. Well, we're just trying to prove to them all the time that they're wrong, in some eternal process of exposing historical fakes, we're trying to explain that black is black, white is white. Maybe we're already somehow that...
I'll tell you, we had a moment when we didn't do this. It was called the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, when we didn't counteract this, when we didn't dose them and didn't correct them.
We have come to the fact that in our universities and in the universities of the first 5, the first 10, what does this mean? That is, those that have already been tested by time, those that formed there like mushrooms after the rain, as you remember, private universities and so on, namely those that are our own universities. Their literature began to spread.
I understand. That is, we got the effect domestically.
Of course, we began to listen in the form of lecturers to absolutely people, as they call them, with their narratives.
The other side never sees their actions.
Of course, with anti-historical narratives. And most importantly, we got a galaxy of these so-called German ambassadors who don't even know about their own history. Why? And no one told them that there was an alternative to their mainstream fake.
No, this cannot be done under any circumstances.
Some kind of stalemate then results. By the way, I have this question directly from your professional field. This is the word narrative.
I only use the term sarcastically when referring to it in this way.
Notice now it's also entered the language of grand diplomacy, like
when you speak the truth, some claim you promote Kremlin narratives, suggesting you avoid saying it.
This replaced the word manual. It's kind of a little higher.
Slightly more academically elaborated, so to speak.
What is a narrative? That is, it's like a narrative. It may be a constructed falsehood, or it may be the truth entirely in itself. But
this is the word narrative, which implies and means some direction of thought, ideology, ideas, thesis, please.
Specific thesis aimed at significant promotion and dissemination.
Simply put, avoiding literal interpretations in restricted terms might provide broader understanding.
Indeed, many perceive this entire cognitive conflict, one we discuss often with Semyon, as a clash of competing narratives developed by opposing forces such as the Kremlin versus the West. The critical challenge lies in determining which storytelling platforms dominate and present better resonance globally.
Well, you see, again, I tried to avoid that, but you invited me to this part of the discussion as well. Life constantly wrestles between truth and falsehood. In everything, in absolute evil. I will never tire of repeating this, in absolute evil. There are different appearances, there are different names in different languages of the world. One of the names sounds and translates. And in Russian, it seems to position itself as a sly, a deceiver. In our modern language, sly seems to be like this, such as cunning, such as rogue, and so on. In fact, sly is talking about a deceiver, a liar. This is not one of the hypostases of absolute evil. This is its essence, the essence of absolute evil in lies. and in changing the truth, in influencing the truth on the truth in such a way that it itself, from the point of view of evil, must become a distortion. Peace stands on this. That is, peace stands on the struggle between good and evil. Light with darkness, truth is difficult.
Your answer is that in no case should we stop at this position and also turn into propagandists. We must stand on the side of the truth at any moment, no matter what, so to speak, narratives they bombard us with.
No, I do not consider propaganda and truth to be antonyms. These are not antonyms. Propaganda is promotion, it is a story, it is informing, it is insisting
On the truth. In this particular situation, I find no evidence of any contradiction.
If May 9, 1945 is seen as Victory Day in the Great Patriotic War, why is it an issue? This recognition is undeniably rooted in propaganda, but it holds historical truth. This serves as the most effective counter to false narratives filling the present. How can we not champion it? The critical issue lies in recognizing the financial and technological power, including advanced AI, being wielded to perpetuate lies and misinformation with impactful precision. When I hear that artificial intelligence and emerging technologies pose an unprecedented challenge to the world in recent years, I can't help but reflect that humanity has faced such transformational moments before. Think of the era when the world encountered the atom and its use in various often conflicting purposes. There were also hydrogen bombs, there were chemical weapons that were talked about. There were pandemics, there were Goebbels propaganda, there were...
Most recently, there was COVID, and in connection with it, the topic of bacteriological.
I believe this is another substantial challenge, distinct but no less impactful than what we've endured before. Ultimately, humanity and its resilience remain at the core of navigating such storms. By harnessing historical context, we can understand and resist the spread of false patterns, those deceptive narratives undermining trust. Truth must guide us. Armed with facts and integrity, we can stand firm against obstacles. Is our truth sufficient for this test?
We have truth. I'm going to paraphrase power and truth a little bit, but our truth has enough power.
Well, it's, into another program.
This is where the people with the glass bowl sit, lay out the cards, lay out the cards. Our task is to work. Our task is to move forward. Our task is to perform functional duties and do it for real, with soul, improving professional skills. And most importantly, at this stage now, this is very important, with full dedication. This is so that when you return home, you understand that you have done everything. That's all I could, that's all. And you should reboot, have time until tomorrow to come again and start again. Well, then everyone has their own front.
But here there is another trick of our pale-faced brothers. Why their narratives go so well, in general, far beyond the limits of the Western world. Firstly, they believe that the social and information networks that they have built penetrate everywhere. And secondly, that they learn to simplify people. Well, this in general, it was also recorded by Baudrillard in the 70s that a person is a consumer, especially a digital consumer. He is always in the state of a teenager, even an adult teenager. And in general, he really isn't interested in it. That is, you can swing on emotions. He can swing on emotions, but in such a situation, he sees as an argument what is brighter, what that catches him. Reels, shorts. Thrills, shorts, yes. And in this sense, considering that we have chosen a similar model of our society, well, that is, consumerism has been a central trend for 30 years, and a significant part of our society is already susceptible to their narratives and in general that,
Format to say more.
well, format, yes.
I visited my parents' house and the channel was airing something intriguing. There was a girl showcasing her skills by playing piano music for about an hour straight.
I think it was Beethoven. Most likely it was Beethoven. She didn't have the score in front of her eyes.
I don't understand how this is possible. I don't know how it's done. An hour? Well, probably maybe there were some kind of breaks. As a young girl, and for example, there are very good videos that Tablets Shahidi made. He recorded in good quality, made videos like little kids, 5, 7 years old, 8 years old, and did it under the name Russian Piano School. They have already performed the most complex pieces without a score. I don't understand how they do it.
Yes, some people simply take their phones, set them down, and create basic content like that. And they sit all day and can only type with their finger, not even on the keys, but on the screen. There are those. And there are those who can take the phone and all day, typing with their finger on the screen, enter some incredible formulas, come and talk, and I proved everything, told everything, created everything. Please, adults, take it, I use it. And there are those who are not interested in the phone so that you don't do anything with them. They take and play this fantastic music.
Let us admit a little of the divine into our lives. Let us still remember that we do not know everything and will never know everything, and that we must do everything that depends on us. And there are also such things as miracles. I really believe that when a 3-4-year-old child sings, but no one sings at home, but he sings a moment, hitting the notes exactly, and no one taught him. And he may not even have a TV.
But he just sings. I think that this, of course, is some kind of miracle. Probably it's explainable, but we just don't know how to explain it yet.
And there are a lot of such things around. And when there were already the darkest times, today we have already talked about a number of them, both in world history and in our history. And suddenly from somewhere, man, do you understand? Yes, we lived through the times of the 90s when the then forming, for example, the young generation of journalists knew the main rule, well, a kind of commercial approach to business. Not everyone, but they were raised that way and they were raised in this environment. Yes, this is good material. This material may be more. Even better, yes. And unfortunately, yes, they were brought up in an absolutely commercialized environment of the information field. This is suddenly Evgeny Podubny, who went through everything, who went through Syria, who went through Donbass, who is now going through the front line, who became a hero of Russia, apparently without being a military man, and there was no case when he would have saved a child, would have taken someone out of a burning hut. Not just for braving bullets, but for the unwavering trust he inspired.
Countless individuals recognize him as their voice of truth, their unwavering representative.
But because he restored faith in the fact that such a profession exists and that not everything is measured by money. Can you explain where all this originates when it seems impossible? I really don't know. Do you understand? I genuinely can't answer it.
Let's suppose there are significant challenges to face.
Many of them, unfortunately, are derived from human activity. Monstrous, terrible. Many apparently are given to us. Maybe just as a test, maybe as a punishment. I don't know how it happens, but these are these challenges.
Our task is to overcome them. How will it be there? Let's see.
Well, still about miracles, I can't help but comment that Comrade Prophet Muhammad in Surah number 29, Alain Kabut, said exhaustively that you who expect miracles from Allah cannot understand that the world itself as it is created is a miracle.
It is already miraculous in itself. A bee flying to a flower is a miracle.
You know, I recently passed a lake near Moscow, Lake Sinesh. And suddenly such an idea is discussing me. My God, if only, for example, I don't know, the Hubble telescope or some satellite or some intergalactic mission would fly to some planet and there would be some red-brown clay slurry, and suddenly in the center of this slurry there would be a lake like this. Finally, we discovered such a beautiful picture in the universe as this lake. And it's just next to us, well, 30, 40 kilometers from Moscow. People walk, swim, catch crayfish, ride on boats. Well, this is everyday life. As soon as I imagine, for example, some butterfly, flower, lake, forest field located on another planet, and I imagine that we're getting the footage from there and what a thrill it's going to be, I realize how incredibly lucky we are and what an incredible planet we got. Nowadays, people rarely perceive it from that perspective.
Before at school, they always told us exactly what a beautiful planet it is, how lucky we are, what kind of foxes, rivers, mountains there are.
How important is it to save it for the next one?
And what is most important, you know, returning to the topic of diplomacy, international relations, and all our global challenges, we have never been told that somewhere is ugly, that it is beautiful only in our country.
But others have such and such and such and such and such and such. We learned this through history, through literature, and at school, and by the way, in kindergarten too.
Yes, and when he said, when he flew around the earth, what a beautiful planet it is and how important it is for us to preserve it.
Of course, that is, there was no this segregation that, look, this is ours, but this is what is not ours. This is bad, but if it is also ours, then it will also become good.
We have always been educated and educated, not only educated, but educated through education to love, to the planet as an amazing and wonderful phenomenon. Again, well, I see such manifestations, for example, in China now, one way or another, through the concept of this interdependence, there, one belt, one road, common responsibility, destiny, humanity. Still, there is this element, and still, 1.5 billion, this is a significant part of humanity, which is also beginning, so to speak, to actively think in this direction, that we are not alone here, and here we have had something that it would be good to save. There are others, though.
And the narrators don't feel sorry for the planet, it seems, although it seems that the Club of Rome, the Davos Forum...
No, well, it all came down to Greta Thunberg. They're like that, that's all.
Characters are periodically chosen, often in a manner lacking any true consideration or fairness. And I, if you look, didn't say her name until she unfortunately began to cause more pity than delight in everyone.
They applauded. I tried to kind of, avoid this topic because I understood how monstrous it was, what was happening.
They took a child, obviously, with very, let's call it, with problems. And this child becomes just some kind of toy in the hands of adults who, having played enough and changed the scenery, simply pushed it away and then simply began to rub and mock. Oh, and it seemed to me that it was not just bad tasty, but precisely godless, that I tried not to touch it at all, not to comment on this topic.
Remember, as Vince said in Munich, yes, you scold us behind a mask and we were forced to listen to your Greta for 10 years.
Yes, but in fact, they could have answered him that it was more yours than ours, because the agenda was purely ultra-democratic. The beat of this agenda, of course, came from Washington, so to speak, Obama, Biden, so it was by no means Western European. They just picked the right person. They conveniently slotted in two ranks, helping the Washington Regional Committee as well. Without their involvement, there would have been no presence for her at crucial platforms like the Capitol or UN headquarters. No podium for her voice, though I can't recall if she was actually at the Capitol. She stood amongst top US leaders, garnering attention she wouldn't have received otherwise. It was like once there is such a thing, unfortunately, Anglicism was accepted, it was approved by them, it was verified by them, and very much even it was theirs.
Maria Vladimirovna, we are already running out of time. We know that you are a very busy person. At the end of the discussion, well, this is a small conclusion to sum up based on the results of the conversation. Do you think it will be possible to preserve all the good things that have been in the history of mankind, and our beautiful planet?
It's okay.
Nothing now, you asked. Without once again needing to remind our Western partners in quotation marks that there are still things more important than what they are now putting on a pedestal, without resorting to any radical methods, but without resorting to another war.
As you see, no altars were prepared for others any longer. For decades now, they refuse to offer themselves, instead sacrificing the futures of their own children on the altar. Well, it's kind of an indicator of not just degradation, but this very edge, that is when not just discussions began, but experiments on their own children. And look, some of the so-called stars, they're representatives of show business, the so-called American soft power. What did they do? Children were adopted, brought from other continents. And they were kind of encouraged to all these experimental ones.
Terrifying occurrences.
Total loss of humanity is happening.
And then they started doing the same with their children.
That is, if the family seems to be without a transgender person and life is in vain, they had such an ideology. They say you don't fit in. They say you need to dig deep into yourself, look for it within yourself. And not only that, finding stimulation. Yes, we will now turn again to Crimea and to marriages between, so to speak, family members, and not only family members, but also various others.
We remember how it ended.
We remember how it ended, and we remember what replaced it. So here's the pressing question. How much of this monstrous whirlpool is it no longer only dehumanization? It is precisely being beyond the boundary, because experiments on one's own children are everything. There is nothing more terrible to agree on.
That is, when the object of the experiment, after they have been carried out with everyone on the perimeter, becomes one's own children. Precisely physiological, disfiguring experiments. Yes, of course.
Hugo in Humplin described experiments on children who were raised either in barrels or had their mouths cut, made of them from the very person who laughs. But these were those children who were considered children according to the theory of class inequalities, as if not their own. They were bought, sold, and so on. He even labeled it as brutal entertainment back then. And this work became like this, well, relatively speaking, a symbol of perversion and boredom for several decades of shooting people. It often turns out that they maim their own children, who are also considered exceptional. And this mutilation implies not only physiological, the damage that they cause and harm to these children, but both physiological and mental and so on and so on. At the genetic level, apparently. I'm putting a star here, I'm not very sure, but taking into account those hormonal experiments that follow with this, it is obvious that these are some already terrible consequences will continue. That sums it up. Rome already passed, the epoch described by Hugo, the abuse of children they considered children, so to speak, of unworthy races.
Dr. Mengel's clinic, conditional.
Yes, absolutely. So all this has already been accumulated and applied to their own children. Therefore, now the question is no longer about how they will look at the world's flowers and enjoy the world's ocean. The question is not how much they will, so to speak, take care of fish in reservoirs or monitor the water level there in Niagara Falls. The question is how they will go out themselves, and there are many of them.
In America, over 300 million people. How much does America affect everyone? How, so to speak, does she prioritize? Western Europe, how much? Western Europe similarly impacts in numbers.
That's the question.
And to what extent this octopus of hell, which, so to speak, they spread ideologically around the world in the form of so-called narratives, so to speak, will be able to rein in. Trumpet these tentacles in the form of US aids, in the form of corresponding parades there.
Incidentally, the rainbow flag flew prominently.
But the question is, why did they do it?
They did this primarily because through these structures, their political opponents domestically earned themselves, again, political points domestically. Do you understand? I don't want to say that they were insincere in the struggle for truth and so on. I don't know, but I see the primacy of their motives. The primacy was in the internal political struggle, you know? And this is still a history that has not yet been overcome within the United States of America, within the Western European Coven. No real resolution is visible yet, suggesting the matter persists. It is very early to say that they will all join hands together and begin dancing around the planet. The question is to what extent they will not reach the edge of this, suicidal philosophizing.
Got it. Thank you very much. Maria Zakharova, Director of the Information and Press Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, was visiting us today. Our presenters, Alexei Chudaev, political scientist, journalist, Semyon Uralov, political scientist, journalist, writer. Dear friends, thank you for watching Purity of Understanding on VK, on RooTube. Look for us on YouTube. We are waiting for you to definitely like this episode and write comments. See you.